Night my sister announced her engagement, I was still paying off my student loans with a second-hand laptop and a prayer. I remember standing in the kitchen of my parents' house in Greenwich, Connecticut, holding a glass of sparkling cider because I'd skipped the champagne, $38 a bottle, and I knew exactly whose credit card wasn't paying for it. Mine. My brother-in-law-to-be, Holden, had proposed to my older sister Isabel at some vineyard in Napa, and now the whole extended family had descended on my parents' colonial house like a flock of well-dressed birds, filling every room with the smell of Chanel and self-congratulation. I'd driven up from Brooklyn in a car that needed new brake pads. I'd noticed the grinding sound on the highway and turned the radio up louder. "You made it," my mother said when she saw me, the way you'd say it to someone who'd survived a long flight in coach. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. She squeezed my hand and moved on to someone more interesting. "The thing about my family is that they don't mean to be cruel. That's what makes it so exhausting. My father built a commercial real estate firm from nothing. Whitmore Capital, 15 offices, properties from Boston to Miami. My sister Isabel followed him into it straight out of Dartmouth, VP of Acquisitions by 30. My brother Leland runs the legal side, made partner at his firm before he was 35, and then there's me, the middle child, the one who went to art school, of all things, and then pivoted to food, of all things, and spent her 20s opening a tiny restaurant in Bushwick that the New York Times called charming but niche. Charming but niche. I put that on the wall in my office as a joke. I didn't think it would still sting 3 years later. The party was already in full swing when Holden's mother, a woman named Patrice who wore pearls to casual dinners, found me near the hors d'oeuvres. She had the particular talent of asking questions that weren't really questions. "Are you still doing the restaurant thing?" she asked, plucking a crostini from the tray. "I am," I said. "Just the one location, for now." She made a small, sympathetic sound like I'd told her my cat had a chronic illness. "That's sweet. It must be nice to have a passion project." I smiled. I've learned to smile at that particular phrase, passion project, as if the thing I'd mortgaged my savings and 4 years of my life into was a scrapbook. My father materialized from somewhere, drink in hand, and clapped Holden on the shoulder. He hadn't noticed me yet. I watched him from across the room, this man I love and have spent my entire adult life trying to impress, laugh his big, confident laugh and tell Holden that he was glad Isabel had found someone who understood the value of a solid investment portfolio. "Not everyone does," he added, and I could have sworn his eyes found me for exactly half a second. I looked down at my cider. Later, after dinner, after Isabel showed off the ring for the 14th time and my mother cried the good kind of tears, my father pulled Leland and Holden into his study for what he called a quick conversation about the trust structure. Isabel went with them, because Isabel always goes. I sat at the kitchen island while the caterers cleared the tables and my brother's wife, Daphne, leaned over and said, very kindly, "Don't take it personally. He just worries about you." "I know," I said. "He mentioned to Leland that he thinks you should consider selling. The restaurant, I mean, before it becomes a liability." She said it the way people deliver bad news they've decided is actually good news, gently, with a tilt of the head. "He could connect you with someone at Whitmore. There's always room for someone with your energy." Energy. Another word for the file. I thanked her and went to get my coat. I didn't say goodbye to my father. I told myself it was because he was busy, and I drove back to Brooklyn with the radio up, and I didn't cry until I was on the BQE, which I considered a personal victory. That was 2 years ago. A lot can happen in 2 years. I should back up. The restaurant was called Juniper. Small, 40 seats, a menu that changed every 6 weeks based on whatever I was obsessing over that season. New American with a southern backbone, because my grandmother on my mother's side was from coastal Georgia and taught me that food is the most honest thing a person can make. The Times review hurt because it was half right. We were niche. We were also quietly becoming something. What no one in my family knew, what I hadn't told anyone outside of my business partner Rowan and our CFO, was that by the time of Isabel's engagement party, I'd already signed a letter of intent for our second location. And 6 months after that, a private equity group out of Chicago reached out about a partnership. And after that came the licensing conversation with a hospitality group that wanted Juniper to anchor a boutique hotel concept in 4 cities. I didn't tell my family because I'd learned slowly and painfully that hope is a private thing until it's a fact. And I'd had too many dinners where I'd shared good news early and watched my father nod politely and say something like, "Let's see how it develops," which was his way of saying he'd believe it when it was in writing. So I waited until it was in writing. All of it. The hospitality deal closed on a Thursday in October. My phone rang at 7:14 in the morning and my attorney said, "We're done," and I sat on my kitchen floor in my pajamas and laughed for about 3 minutes straight. Rowan texted me 17 exclamation points and a gif of a woman screaming into a pillow. Our CFO, a meticulous woman named Priya, who had never once raised her voice in the 2 years I'd known her, sent a single message, "Champagne tonight, my treat." The deal valued the Juniper brand at $42 million. I was 31 years old. I thought about calling my father. I picked up the phone twice. Both times I put it down, because I knew exactly how that conversation would go. The pause, the careful calibration, that's significant, though of course it depends on the terms. And I wasn't ready to have that conversation from the floor of my kitchen, in my pajamas. I wanted to be standing up when I told him. I wanted to be wearing shoes. The opportunity came the following April, at Isabel's wedding. She'd chosen a venue in the Hudson Valley, a restored estate with a working farm and a kitchen garden that made me genuinely emotional just looking at it. 230 guests. A Michelin-starred caterer I happen to know personally because the food world is smaller than people think. A 4-piece string quartet for the ceremony and a jazz band for the reception. Holden's family flew in from London. My father gave a toast that made half the room cry and the other half check their watches because he has never quite learned the difference between a business address and a wedding speech. I sat at table 7 between a cousin I'd met twice and a college friend of Holden's who spent most of dinner explaining cryptocurrency to me in a way that suggested he assumed I'd never heard of it. Patrice found me again during cocktail hour, this time with a woman I didn't recognize. Someone from Holden's world, I gathered, with the kind of effortless posture that comes from decades of never worrying about money. "This is our Hannah," Patrice said, the possessive making me blink. "Isabel's little sister. She runs a restaurant in Brooklyn." "Oh, how fun," the woman said. "It's actually a brand now," I said pleasantly, because I had been practicing. "We just closed a partnership with Meridian Hospitality, 4 locations across the country by next year." Patrice's smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes recalibrated. "Meridian," she repeated. "The hotel group? That's the one. I didn't know you were involved with them." "It's been a busy few months," I said, and excused myself to get another drink. My father found me at the bar. He came up beside me and ordered a scotch, and for a moment we just stood there the way we sometimes do. Not unfriendly, just 2 people who've never quite figured out the right frequency for each other. "Patrice just told me something interesting," he said. "Did she?" He looked at me. My father has never been good at being wrong, but he's always been good at being direct. "Meridian Hospitality, that's a serious group." "Yes," I said, "it is." "How long has this been in the works?" "About 8 months." He was quiet for a moment. The bartender set down his scotch, and he turned it slowly on the napkin. "You didn't mention it. You told me to let things develop before talking about them." I smiled at him. "So I did." Something moved across his face. "I've spent my whole life trying to read my father, and I still can't always name what I see there." This one was somewhere between pride and discomfort, which is where he lives when he can't be in charge of a situation. "The valuation," he started. $42 million, I said. $42 million, I said. "For the brand, not including the real estate." The Scotch glass stilled in his hand. I'd imagined this moment so many times that when it finally arrived, it felt quieter than I expected. Not triumphant, not the crash of a wave, just clear, like a window that had finally been cleaned. My father set down his drink and looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. Hannah, he said, and stopped. You don't have to say anything, I told him. I want to. I know. I picked up my own drink. Later. There's a wedding happening. We stood there another moment, and then he did something I did not expect. He reached over and put his hand on my shoulder. Not a pat, not a brief touch, but actually rested his hand there, the way you do when you don't have words yet, but you need someone to know you're present. I looked straight ahead at the bar and let him. Leland found out during dinner, when he overheard Holden's London cousin mention the juniper deal to someone across the table. He appeared beside me during the salad course with his tie loosened and his eyebrows somewhere near his hairline. You sold juniper? I didn't sell it. I partnered it. For how much? Enough, I said, and turned back to my salad. He sat down in the empty chair beside me, the cousin had gone to dance, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from my brother in a long time. It was the expression he used to have when we were kids, and I'd done something that surprised him genuinely, not just annoyed him. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about all the dinners, all the polite nods, all the passion projects, and it must be nice, and let's see how it develops. I thought about driving home on the BQE with the radio up. I'm telling you now, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is that why you've been so annoyingly calm lately? Probably. He shook his head slowly, and something that might have been a smile crossed his face. You're something else, you know that. I've been told. The best part of the evening happened near the end of the night, during the last round of toasts. I hadn't planned it. I wasn't going to say anything. It was Isabel's night, completely, and I had no interest in making it about myself. But my father stood up and gave a second, shorter toast, which no one had asked for, and at the end of it he looked directly at me across the table and said, "And I want to say something about Hannah, who I owe an apology to. I told her once, not in so many words, that what she was building wasn't worth taking seriously. I was wrong. She built something extraordinary, and she built it without my help, which tells me she didn't need it." He raised his glass. "To Hannah, the one who got away and made us all better for it." 230 people looked at me. I don't cry easily. It's a character flaw according to my therapist. But I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for a very long time, and I raised my glass back at him and I said, "To second opinions." The room laughed and my sister hugged me from behind, and Patrice, across the table, gave me a look I can only describe as freshly reoriented. The weeks after the wedding moved fast. Beridian announced the partnership publicly in May, and the press that followed was more than I'd expected. Food media, business media, a profile in a magazine I'd read in waiting rooms for years. My phone didn't stop for about 10 days. Rowan handled most of the press requests with the calm efficiency she handles everything, which is why I would walk into traffic for her. My father called me 3 times in that period. The first call was brief. He wanted to understand the deal structure, which is just how he processes things, through numbers and logistics. The second call was longer, and somewhere in the middle of it he said, almost as an aside, "I should have come to see the restaurant. I should have done that years ago." I told him he could still come. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "I'll make a reservation." I didn't make it easy for him and tell him he didn't need one. I let him make the reservation like any other guest. He came on a Tuesday in June, early service, with my mother and Leland and Daphne. I didn't go to their table until after their entrees arrived. I was in the kitchen, where I belonged during service, but I watched from the pass as they ate. I watched my father take a bite of the Carolina shrimp with charred corn and put down his fork for a moment in a way that meant something had surprised him. I watched my mother close her eyes briefly over the biscuits, which are my grandmother's recipe and the reason I do what I do. I watched Leland finish his plate and immediately flag down the server. I came out after the main course. My father stood up when he saw me, which he doesn't usually do, and said, "This is remarkable." "Thank you," I said. Grandmother would have liked the corn. She would have claimed the recipe was hers, my mother said, and we all laughed, and for a moment it was just a family at a table, nothing complicated about it. That's the version I hold on to. Not the engagement party, not the parking lot of the BQE with the radio up, not the passion project or the let things develop. This one, my father standing up, my mother laughing. The corn, the biscuits, the Tuesday night hum of a restaurant that I built. The Meridian deal meant changes, good ones mostly. The 4 new locations opened on schedule: Nashville, Denver, Charleston, and Portland. Each one took something from the original Juniper and grew it differently, the way a recipe changes when you take it somewhere new. Nashville got the biscuits on the brunch menu and a bourbon selection that Rowan personally curated. Charleston went coastal, local oysters, low country rice dishes, a whole section of the menu my grandmother would have recognized. I flew between cities more than I drove anywhere that first year, and I ate more airport food than I preferred to admit, but every time I walked into one of those kitchens and saw the line moving and smelled what we built, I thought, okay, this is why. The hardest part was learning to lead at scale instead of just leading in one kitchen. Rowan calls it letting go of the tongs, which I hated the first 17 times she said it and have since adopted as my primary management philosophy. There were nights when I wanted to be behind the stove and instead I was on a call with an architect in Portland arguing about exhaust hood placement, and I had to remind myself that this was also cooking, just a different kind. Pryor put together a proper board. We brought in advisors. The business started to look like a business, not just a restaurant with ambition and good cornbread. My father joined the advisory board in the fall. He didn't ask, he offered, which was different. He said he wanted to be useful, not in charge. Pryor, who had met him exactly once and already had his number completely, said afterward, "He's going to be fine as long as you remember it's your table." I told her I'd had exactly that framed on my wall in spirit for the last 5 years. She laughed and told me to get some sleep. I am not someone who believes in clean endings. Life doesn't really work that way. My father still sometimes speaks in a register that assumes he knows best, and I still sometimes drive with the radio up too loud. My mother still touches my arm the way she does when she's worried about me, and I still catch myself, sometimes, doing something just to prove a point to people who aren't in the room anymore. But here's what I know now, that I didn't know when I was standing in that Greenwich kitchen with a glass of cheap cider. The work was never about them. I told myself it was for a long time. I told myself I was building something to show them, to make my father say the words, to earn the seat at the table. And maybe that was true at the beginning. Maybe that's how a lot of things get started, from the friction of being underestimated. But somewhere around the second year, somewhere between the first bad review and the first really full Saturday night, it stopped being about proving anything. It became about the corn, about the biscuits, about the way a room sounds when people are eating food that someone made with their whole attention. That's the thing about being told you're a passion project. Either it breaks you or it shows you exactly what you're made of. And what I'm made of, it turns out, is stubbornness and my grandmother's recipes and a very high tolerance for being underestimated. I'll take it. Last month, a food magazine asked me what I tell my younger self. The one with the grinding brakes and the cider glass and the long drive home on the BQE. I thought about it for longer than they probably wanted me to. I'd tell her, don't explain yourself to people who've already decided what you are. Let them keep their opinion. You're going to need them to underestimate you. It's the only time they'll leave you alone long enough to actually work. And also, get the brake pads fixed. That was genuinely dangerous. I used to think the hardest part was building something real from nothing. The sleepless nights, the bad reviews, the weeks when payroll felt like a math problem I couldn't solve. But I was wrong. The hardest part was building it while the people you love most looked at you with that particular kind of patience. The kind that isn't patience at all, but a very polished form of doubt. My father is not a cruel man. That matters, and I want to be honest about it. He didn't set out to make me feel small. He set out to protect what he understood, and I was something he didn't understand yet. That's a real distinction. It took me years to make it, and making it didn't erase anything. It just gave me somewhere to put it that wasn't inside my chest. What I come to believe, not as a philosophy but as something I actually watched happen in real time, is that how you treat people before they've proven themselves tells you everything about your own character and nothing about theirs. Patrice called Juniper a fun project while she was eating past appetizers at a wedding, where I'd quietly become something she'd never anticipated. My father told Leland I should consider selling before I'd finish building. Neither of them were bad people. They were just people who'd learned to measure worth in credentials they could already recognize. And that's a failure of imagination, not of heart. The cause and effect of my story isn't dramatic. I didn't get revenge. I got receipts. I kept my head down. I worked inside the thing I believed in, and I let time do what time does, which is turn private effort into public fact, whether anyone was paying attention or not. The deal with Meridian didn't happen because I wanted to prove my father wrong. It happened because Rowan and Pryor and I made about 10,000 small right decisions over 4 years, and enough of them held. That's not a miracle. That's just what sustained work looks like from the outside after the fact, when the number is clean and the press release is drafted and everyone suddenly wants to weigh in. The intelligence part, and I believe in intelligence as a practice, not a gift, is knowing what not to say and when. I didn't call my father when the deal closed. I didn't send the Forbes piece to the family group text. I waited until I was wearing shoes, as I told myself that morning on the kitchen floor, and I let the truth arrive in a room I didn't have to stage. That restraint cost me more than people realize. It is genuinely hard to sit on good news when you've spent years being underestimated by people whose opinion still matters to you, even when you wish it didn't. The character part is what I'm still working on. My father stood up when he saw me walk through the dining room, and something in me that had been braced for years just softened. Not because I needed the acknowledgement anymore, because I'd stopped needing it somewhere along the way, and that made receiving it feel like grace instead of a verdict. That's the thing nobody tells you about resilience. It's not about getting hard. It's about getting so clear on what you're doing and why that other people's disbelief stops being an obstacle and starts being irrelevant. And once it's irrelevant, it can become something stranger, useful even. Because the people who never believed in you leave you alone, and the people who leave you alone give you time, and time, used correctly, is the only thing that actually matters. I built Juniper in the quiet they handed me. I'd do it again the same way.